8. The Lost Boys. My Aunt Trina was hired as a youth coordinator at the Copeland Community Center when I was 11. I went to work with her during summer and holiday breaks from school and occasional weekends for family day on Saturday afternoons and teen night on Friday evenings after turning 12. Copeland served the Harborview housing community, otherwise known as the Projects. Harborview may have been low income, but it was no Marcy House or Cabrini Green by any stretch of the imagination. However, in Duluth, they were the Projects. Faded brown, run-down townhomes that used to be housing for the families of Air Force officers who were stationed at the base a few miles away. I didn't care what they called the neighborhood or who used to live there. The Lost Boys, as I called us, were there then, and all that mattered to us were games and make-believe. They weren't aware of the Lost Boy moniker I assigned to us back then, and they barely accept it now, over 25 years later. We were the crew, or the guys, until we became the Tat after getting a group tattoo of a symbol comprised of our first initials. Some know us as the Wolf Pack, others as OPP, Office Poker Players. But at the end of the day, all those words are just synonyms for brothers. We had our own backyard wrestling federation, complete with cardboard championship belts and specific rules and guidelines that allowed our disbelief to remain suspended without committing to the point of actually harming one another. Some were obvious, like no hitting hard unless it's a knife-edge chop to the chest, to the more nuanced rules of when a wrestler is allowed to kick out of a 3-count or able to counter a special move. It was very organized for the most part. Loose storylines went on for weeks uninterrupted until a disagreement would occur over a wrestler's ability to remain unfazed through punishment as if they were the ultimate warrior, rising up immediately after receiving a pedigree delivered by Triple H at WrestleMania 12. A rogue imagination was as good as cheating in our book, which meant the game was over, and it was on to the next. We fought as characters from Dragon Ball Z. I wasn't a fan of watching the show unless we were all watching it together, but I still watched independently to learn my character Piccolo's signature moves and backstory. We played football, had foot races, and held competitions from the swing set to see who could kick their shoe the furthest distance. We competed ferociously with one another when we played slug bug, woody safety, and called dibs on fancy cars we wanted to drive one day. Everything was a game to us, and some of them were even organized. The Lost Boys had a summer of soccer before my time, and we played a subpar season of RBI baseball as well, but softball was king of summer for us. Our practice field had a playground, community garden, and rec center in its outfield, but we made it work. In the park or on top of Copeland was a home run, and if you hit the ball into the garden, it was an automatic triple. Copeland didn't have a van to shuttle us around in for our first season playing in the senior league, so we'd often travel by way of 4 to 5 car fleet of Diamond Taxi. Copeland eventually got its own van, and it was usually driven by Ackerman. Ackerman was another youth coordinator for the center, a lost boy in his own rights, but a mentor and father figure to us growing up. He wasn't our coach, though. Our coach was named Rick Sundquist. Rick fucking loved softball. The only thing he loved more were kids, his wife Peggy, and the song Eye of the Tiger by Survivor. Peggy wasn't able to have children, so Rick spent his life coaching them. We gave Rick a lot more shit than he deserved looking back, but he had some of it coming. One can't expect to make a van full of unruly teenage boys listen to his favorite song before every game and watch him unironically fist bump and sing along to it for 4 minutes and 5 seconds without getting made fun of at least a little bit. But admittedly speaking, Eye of the Tiger got us unironically jacked up as well, and I still work out to that song to this day. Thanks, Rick. After the song ended, we listened to Ackerman's signature pregame or pre-any outing speech. Remember, you're representing Copeland. Don't embarrass me, and don't embarrass yourselves. In other words, I know you're all animals, but act right in front of people. It curbed quite a bit of public shenanigans. Time and place for everything was another one of Ackerman's favorite quotes. It was often in reference to our proclivity to use profanity inside the walls of Copeland and in front of other authority figures. Ackerman could be very convincing, so much so that he convinced me to play basketball for the Copeland team just a few days after I ghosted the freshman team. We sucked, but we had a good time hanging out before and after games and during practices at the Y. We recruited a few players from outside of Copeland in hopes they'd be ringers, but we still ended the regular season in the spring with a dearth of W's. Luckily for us, every team made the playoffs. Unfortunately for me, Copeland's playoff run coincided with my high school's one-act play. I was still kicking myself for not going out for the fall musical, Cinderella, because it would have given me a chance to confess my love for a girl I had a crush on. Her locker was across the hall from mine, but I was too afraid of public rejection to ask her out in front of her friends. I had another opportunity to act over the Christmas season. Our new church, Jesus' Life Ministries, put on a nativity play. I had no interest in playing Joseph in that production, but my mom wanted to play the mother of the star of the play. I refused to learn my lines and wrote them all over my hands and arm before the show. I tried very hard to get out of doing that play up until opening night, but after the figurative curtains opened in the basement banquet hall of the Grand Supper Club, I put forth little effort into being subtle about trying to read the smudged chicken scratch scribbled on my arm. As good as it felt to stick it to the man that tried to piss in my artistic bowl of Cheerios, I didn't appreciate anyone thinking I was a shitty actor. I had to redeem myself with the one-act play. News, news, man falls into the subway. That was one of only 3 lines that came with my role as a newsboy. For whatever reason, I just couldn't commit. The drama coach, Liz Larson, said she didn't believe I was excited to shout the news. Liz had an acting credit in the movie Drop Dead Fred, so I trusted in her acting prowess, but I couldn't imagine who would ever be excited to report such a news story. Beyond the hats they wore, nothing about being a newsboy made me want to pretend to be one. I don't even remember the name of that play, or what the rest of it was about. I ghost quit the play, and later blamed my commitment to Copeland basketball's one-game playoff run. It was a weak excuse, but I didn't really need a strong one. Summer had arrived. 9th grade didn't live up to my specific vision of itself, but it was over, and there was always next year. While I contemplated exactly how I would reinvent myself come fall and sophomore year, the Lost Boys and I spent the summer playing softball, pitching in to buy dub sacks of swag to celebrate our victories, and working part-time jobs in various youth centers through the Yes Duluth program, Youth Employment Services. Well, the journey will continue in Ordinary World Part 2. Beneath Summer.
There's a villain in the story. There's a villain in the story. There's a villain in the story. He ain't got no need for the glory. He's a desperate man. He's a desperate man. He's a desperate